Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barry Louise Switson, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned? Are you the type of person who creates something and people will say, "Oh, you're nuts. You don't know what you're talking about. You think outside the box and nobody's listening to you"? Well, I think everything changed once the internet came around, where you really had to start thinking outside the box to solve some of the problems. It also helped to create some of the most incredible businesses the world has ever seen. With me today is Dianne DeVitt, and we're going to talk about creativity, how to enhance your creativity, make sure you're listened to, and what else is going on in the world of creativity. And I would like to welcome Dianne. Dianne, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Barry. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you. How did you get started, let's say, in the world of creativity? Because basically you do events. What prompted you to get into this arena?
Well, my studies were in theater when I was in college, and I actually had a double major at the time in set and costume design, and then also in what's known as developmental drama, which another form of that is creative dramatics. Now, you say, what is that? So this was all back in the 70s, and what it did is it manifested the study of creative dramatics and drama therapy was using theatrical tools in an educational setting or an academic setting or also in a health setting. And that creative thinking stayed with me throughout my journey into the world of events.
That's incredible, because back in the 90s, God, I feel so old when I mention
I know.
I feel like my parents, back when. It was interesting because I took some courses at New York University on sports and entertainment. And while our paths never crossed, you always had to think outside the box, especially if you were faced with a challenge that you weren't expecting.
Right.
How does somebody create let's start back. How does somebody build an event? Let's start with that.
How does someone build an event? That's like saying to a realtor, how do you build a building? Or an architect.
Okay.
An architect, how do you design an environment for a specific building, for a company? And I actually use that analogy, and many of us in the events industry have called ourselves event architects, because beginning to put the pieces together for a meeting and event all start with business theory and business objectives. That's really what it starts with, is what's the objective and what's the goals and what needs to be accomplished, because you're taking an intangible concept and you're turning it into a tangible environment and something for people to interact with, an activation and engagement. So the first pieces are to find out, Barry, yes, you called me to have this event. What's your vision? What are you thinking? And many times what you're thinking, and then going through the whole process of what the power of that live communication is, grows and metabolizes or changes itself into something bigger and better.
So you basically start with a kernel of an idea. And it just goes and goes, and depending on your objective, it can take many different shapes. How do you rein in all your creative ideas to make it function?
So I'm going to go back to the whole concept of how we started here, which is, let's get the core objective and goals and put them down on paper. And now, when I look at that, when I look at those business objectives, there are two things that I will do afterwards. One is I'll start to think about, where is the right stage for this? Where is this vision that Barry has or that someone has who comes to me going to take that vision, take that message, and make it come alive in the most vibrant, dynamic, impressive way? Because just like the theater, when you're in theater and you choose a specific place to produce a play, you know this, the specific hotel has an impact on the result of the meeting and event. So I think that you start with putting together that. The second thing that is very important to me is creating a theme, because a good book attracts you by the name and the cover. A good movie is tantalizing with the name. A play, you take any one of the Broadway plays and the names of them, and it piques your curiosity and your intrigue. The same goes for an event, because using a cohesive, attractive theme actually helps bring it together. It creates a unity, it creates an appeal, and it gives everyone a direction who's working on the event, from a production point of view, to speakers, to decor and design.
Now, all right, let's back up a second. What does creativity mean to you?
What does creativity to me means allowing yourself to take that little voice in your head and trust it, that what you see may not be what others see, but believing in yourself and having that confidence to voice that vision. To me, that's what creativity is allowing yourself to trust yourself, to voice that vision in your head, to change things, to make them better, to stimulate, to do anything that you can think of.
Because it seems like we're both on the same path, where we both think very creatively. And that's a clever way how to say it, by the way. That's a creative way how to say it, right?
So, right? I like the version.
How do you convince other people that you're right? I mean, if you're is it easy? Do you have a difficult time? Is it easy? What's a key thing that you use to prove that you're right when you see a vision of something?
Oh, wouldn't everyone like to know that answer? And so when I'm sure of something, when someone comes to me with a vision, and I'm sure of something, the very last thing that I do is tell them my vision.
Because?
Okay. Because it's too much sometimes for people to jump in the deep end of the pool at one time. So when, if I were to stand on the stage of the Metropolitan Opera House and someone said, "Dianne, sing an aria from Carmen," I would freeze and probably fall down, okay, because I wouldn't know what to do. But if someone first told me about Carmen and took me to the middle of the stage and walked me through, and actually, if I had any kind of voice, gave me lessons and taught me and guided me along the way, maybe before you know it, I'd find myself standing in the center of the stage and singing that aria. So what I find in working with my clients over the years is that I drip as I go, and I guide as I go. I call myself a seer. And I think that one of the biggest talents that someone can do when they're a director, because basically you're a director of a production, and you're guiding people, you're strategizing with them, you're being diplomatic And what do they say? Like diplomacy is, the art of diplomacy is having people think that they thought of what you're actually trying to get them to do. So you plant the seeds, people buy into them, they're more comfortable, and you grow with it. But I can't, in my experience, I have never just delved in and said, we have to do this. We have to do this in order to get it through. Because if it doesn't make you comfortable and you're not comfortable with it, it's not going to work.
When you are the creative type and you think outside of the box, what are the strengths and challenges that are associated with this?
Strength of being a creative type is that you are adaptable to almost any situation, because I think one of the things that comes with creativity is resourcefulness and being able to find a solution. Now, that being said, when you live in the world with other people and you're the creative type, it's very intimidating to some people, being able to, when you come up with an idea right away. Or people aren't there yet in their thought process, so it can be very off-putting. So what I found in my life, and this is starting back in high school when I didn't know I was creative. Who knew what they were like? I didn't know what I was like, and people say, "Yo, you're creative." I thought, okay, well, isn't everybody? Don't you see what I see? Don't you see the same red? Don't you see how that empty ballroom can be transferred into a wonderland? Don't you see that? No, I don't, Dianne. So that realization that what you see is not what other people see is, to me, it's not a challenge, but it's a lesson to be learned as a creative, is to how to impart that and share it with people so that they're in their comfort zone as well. The man in my life is an engineer. We laugh because we talk about the left brain and the right brain, and I always tell him, walk on my left side so I don't fall down, because I'm the right brain in the family. But in his left brain engineer way, he's as creative, but in a different way. So he's learning to put the little blocks together in the way that they all fit, versus somebody else who has a spaghetti head and they're just tying all the circuits together. So getting back to the strengths and challenges of it, I think that would be the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway I would share with everybody is it's great to come up with a vision. How you put that on paper in steps, which we can talk about further, is one thing, but how you intimidate or isolate people with your big ideas is something that people should be aware of.
Dianne, what sparked your interest in the research that you've done on sensory, communication, creativity, and experimental?
Well, for many years as a speaker, I would tell people to use their 5 senses when they were planning an event. What you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch. How you use them depends on who you're planning the event for, where the event is, and what kind of experience you want to have. So, for example, if I were planning an event for a very experienced and well-heeled group who had a higher taste level, I would focus on wine and food. I wouldn't focus on other things because maybe I have to make a choice with the budget, all right? So for many years I taught the 5 senses, and I would, when you say go back, I would tell people to take out a nickel and keep that nickel on their desk and always look at that nickel, that when they're planning, to remind them to use one of the 5 senses.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So when I wrote my book, I wrote more about this and realized that the whole objective of any event is to create a secure environment, create a safe environment, create a fun environment, create an environment that actually gives people, what I say, permission to play. Now, that was all the foundation to this interest that piqued my attention in the sensory communication area. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I started to do some major research in this area, and it's amazing what was uncovered. And from an advertising point of view, a PR point of view, a marketing point of view, and how it's slowly encroaching and building itself into the world of meetings and events, which is, as you know now, everything is referred to as experiential. And the second word with that now is all stimulate the senses. But the fact behind that is this. When you are in an environment, a controlled environment like an event, as the event producer, I'm actually helping you with what you taste, where you sit, what you smell, what you hear, and what you touch. And because 85% of our communication is nonverbal, only 15% is heard, and out of that 15%, 7% of the words you hear are retained. So it's really interesting when you start to think about that. So if you were to walk into an event that had a specific scent to it, every year you went to the same event and the same lavender scent, for example, was permeated through the air, you would remember that event as the lavender event.
That's true.
Right?
Absolutely.
I mean, let me give you an example. So, for example, and this is what I ask people, we all can go back to when we were children in a family environment. I'm going to go use my example. And my aunt would walk in and smother me with her Shalimar. With this, do you remember? Or whatever
Shalimar,
the scent was at the time. And you squinched your face and you say, eh. But I can remember that like it was yesterday. I can remember my grandmother's scent when she kissed us. I can remember my father wearing his Old Spice as if it was the luxury brand. My mother still has the bottle of Old Spice in the bathroom, where my father's passed now, but she has the bottle in the bathroom. But the fact is that scent, we retain scent 90% recollection. So that's what started to pique my interest in it, is knowing and learning all those facts and how an event in this special moment of time, in this secure environment, can actually impart and affect and change people non-verbally in ways that they will never forget. So how you use the senses is now an integral component of planning a dynamic and a memorable event.
We also have, I send out cards to people. Mm-hmm. I have a business called sendoutcards.com, and it's amazing the response that I have been getting, because people are so inundated with emails. Mm-hmm. They don't read them, they miss them, they lose them, they go into spam, whatever. But this little card that comes in the mail, I have gotten so many heartfelt thank yous.
So many.
That's amazing. I mean, it's like I congratulated somebody. I sent a condolence card, and on the condolence card, I put the person's picture who passed. And
isn't that special?
It was, because they put it in a frame, and they said they look at their mother every single day. So there's the different types of sensory. You wrote a book now called What Color is Your Event? Industry resource on how to think and plan creatively.
Close enough.
I can't, that's amazing. I can't pronounce
You
the word.
want to try it again?
No.
Okay.
But it was fascinating. I read it, and it was like, wow, where was this book when I was doing events?
Thank you, Barry. I appreciate that. Again, when you start this conversation out and you said, what is the strengths and weakness of being a creative and a visionary? When I wrote this book, the world was gray. I'm actually planning a second edition of it in the next year. But the analogy and the use of color in this book was color as a language, was using it to communicate with people in a world that needed to be communicated to, that realized that every gathering, you know, every gathering that you have is a special one. And the personality that it takes is your choice. And we've used, you know, we've used different terms, and we've used color in different phrases, you know, yellow belly and red badge of courage and green with envy and white with rage. We've used these terms through our lives and not really thought about it, because you say, oh, it's an old wives' tale, or it's a phrase that you use. But when you start to correlate the meaning of those colors with the emotions that they're attributed to, they all have a meaning. So the name for this book, the What Color Is Your Event, ultimately had to do with the human connection and the human and human compassion, and, you know, at the very height of it all, the empathy that we show to one another and with one another when we're together.
It's amazing. I mean,
it.
it goes back to the littlest thing can have the biggest impact.
Biggest impact.
And that's why the word thank you is so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Well, you highlighted it with your cards, you know, mentioning the cards too, and the impact that visual made was incredible. It still is. I'm sure it stays with people forever.
You're using color as a metaphor. Can you explain a little bit more?
There's a quote in the book that I added from Georgia O'Keeffe that I can say more things with color than I can with any words. I'm paraphrasing, but I won't quote Georgia O'Keeffe exactly, but I quoted Dianne DeVitt version, and that's really how I feel. And when I was researching color for the book, because it's an integral part of the whole publication, I learned such fascinating things. For example, I learned it. Now, if I were holding two pieces of identical luggage, Barry, this is a question. One was white and one was brown. Which one is heavier?
They're both the same.
Very good. You get an A+. But when I'm speaking and I ask the audience that and I take a vote, I can't tell you how many people choose the darker color to be heavier, because dark in our mind is perceived as heavier. But I also said to you, two identical pieces.
Right.
So you listened, right? Most people don't listen. But the concept, like, for example, when we're writing on the yellow legal pad, that shade of yellow actually was done deliberate, because that shade of yellow helps us to focus more.
Oh, interesting.
So when you go in and you start correlating the world of color and design, and of course logos is a whole marketing, but when you start thinking about the impact of color on us as a language, imagine the tool that the event planner, the event designer has to use to change people just using that visual dynamic. So that's what excites me. Like Pantone just came out with their color of the year, which is a coral, which is actually a very good sign. Last year was a purple, and that was a good sign for us.
I'm a very big purple person.
Yes, it's
extremely
elevating.
big. It's also intuitive. It's psychic. It's all these, and that's what I am. And I guess it frightens me too, because you see things or think things so far in advance that it's like, whoa, step back a minute, don't say anything. Okay, let's move on.
Okay.
You created definitions in your book. So what are their meanings, like VD, ED, KE, event stylist?
I don't like to say VD. VD, visual dynamics.
Oh, okay.
Is what I call that, yes. So there are three areas that I speak about in the book. And one is the concept of visual dynamics, which is an obvious thing. You say, well, Dianne, it's everything I see. Well, yes, that's true. But let's go back to, we're designing this event. When does that event start? That event starts the second Barry sees the email notification, and what is the graphic, and what is the color, and what is the font. So it's the obvious visual, but it's also the visual that you see when the event is over as well, because the post-event marketing is just as important from a branding point of view with events.
You know, that's very interesting that you said it starts with the email. I never thought about that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, actually, in some cases, if it's an annual event, you know, it starts when the one event ends live and you say, see you next year, and you put the logo and the date on, that's the impression it causes from a marketing point of view. So the second area that I speak about that I created is kinetic engineering. And I go back to the use of the word kinesis. Kinesis is all about movement. So in many ways, the event architect, the person involved in people moving and experiential design, is responsible for moving people. And many, nowadays, as a consultant, I'm involved in this world of, customer experience, right? Everything is an experience, whether you're in a hospital, you're in a retail store, you're at an event, you're at someone's home. It's all experiential. But it does go back to the basics of this is how are you moving? What are you seeing? What is that experience? And the last topic of the three is about risk management, which I am a big fan of adhering to. I always tell people, learn what you can't do first and then adjust to it. Because in producing events, in anything you do in life, let's follow the guidelines and then let's change them to make them work for us, right?
Absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Oh, you've been doing this for a couple years.
Yes.
What stands out as one of the worst disasters in the events that you've had, and how did you overcome it?
We all have war stories, as we say, right?
Right.
When my colleagues and I get together, we have a few laughs, but then we try to forget them because some of them you just have to. So I would say one of the biggest disasters in my event career started out right at the beginning of my event career. I was not on the job 6 months, and I was given the responsibility to plan a huge event on the mall in Washington, D.C., right in front of, the mall, right in front of where Abe Lincoln, the statue is. And this was an event for a pharmaceutical company. A pharmaceutical company launching a new product. So it was a celebration. And about maybe, 5,000 people were due to be there. And it was the
Intimate
rainiest.
gathering.
Intimate gathering. It was the rainiest spring in the history of Washington, D.C. And my client actually had, he had contacts. I had a contact with the weather service, and so on and so forth. But here's the lesson with this, is that I was very new on the job, but I still knew enough to find a plan B in the case of rain, which I did. And I had a backup building that would have housed the people and been perfect, all right? But the business lesson from this was that I was too honest, being a newbie on the job. And I told my client that it would cost at the time an extra big $10,000 to hold this space so that we could make the decision at the 11th hour and move everything inside. And they didn't approve the backup plan. Nowadays, it wouldn't even be a discussion because I would refuse to do the event, all right? But in those days, I was too honest. And Barry, you're too honest, you're too young, and you just think it's going to work. And the morning of the event, now I'm talking 2 major, not tents, but construction, like warehouse construction size things on the side of the mall. And it just was inevitable that it was going to rain, but we didn't know when. Caterer set up the tent. We warned all the women to not wear heels. Of course, they came in heels. I had Marvin Hamlish at the time and like an 80-piece orchestra, Miss America, and so on and so forth, and it just goes on and on. Well, the first bus pulls up from the 10 hotels that are involved, And when the door opened and the people started coming out, the heavens broke. The sky opened. It rained. It deluged so hard you couldn't see your hand in front of you. This is how long ago it is. A payphone. I went to the payphone and I did what anyone would do in my position and called my parents because it was just so overwhelming. I didn't know where to start. And this is a funny story in our family because I called and my mother answered, and what is that? What is that sound in the background? Oh, that's rain, Mom. And she, of course, starts singing, raindrops keep falling on my head, which is what my mother did when she didn't have words. And I just remember saying to her, put my father on. I need a voice of reason. And, of course, we got ourselves together and we fixed it. But the outcome to that was that the caterer had to tear down. We used the tables as sidewalks. People just kept showing up. The band literally sank in the mud. I had to escort Marvin Hamlish out, help the band leaders out, get people away. It just did not stop raining. And I subsequently found out that the mall area there during World War II was a parking lot. And so when it rains so heavily like it did, it becomes this quagmire, this mud field. So there isn't nothing to drain it. So I became very familiar with the U.S. government and grass. I learned a lot about grass and seeding and repair. And yes, so I would say that was my biggest disaster. But there's always a risk involved, always.
What happened to the gentleman who negated your Plan B?
Yes. So, Barry, when my name was on everything at that point. So when the two Department of Defense, police came in and looked for Dianne DeVitt, my client, and the Plan B, the Plan B person disappeared. They wanted nothing to do with it. So it was a good business lesson for me. It was a good business lesson for me, that for sure.
It's more than a good business lesson. It's like pushing for something, and no matter if you're young or if you're old, somebody's going to try to negate what you want to do, and it's just sticking to your guns.
Right. It's sticking to your guns. And when you talk about, we get back to creativity, and that's one of the reasons why, I've been teaching for so long at NYU. I impart these stories to my students because I want them to hear the lessons behind them when they're encountering it, because there's always something that can go wrong in a live event. Always risk is at hand, right?
Absolutely, and it's how you mitigate the situation that you come out looking like a star.
And that's what creativity is, isn't it? People, like when you ask me at the very core what creativity is, at its core, it's finding a solution, isn't it? It's finding a solution that there's always an option B.
What do you find in all these tools with the internet and going back? What do you find is the most underutilized tool around?
Interesting. Pencils.
Pencils? Because?
Pencils and a pad and a column that says this space for doodling. That's what I think. Because in our brain, and I'm going to go back to the sensory topic again, holding our devices actually deadens our other senses.
I agree.
Well, this is the fact. When I go like that and tap my fingers, 10,000 receptors go off. 10,000, just by that. So when I'm constantly holding that device, all of those receptors are derailed, kind of like being on a detour on a main highway, all right? It's the whole concept of, you've heard this slogan before, you eat with your eyes first, because you truly do. You see the plate, you process the colors, you process the smells before you taste the food. Your body is already telling you, your mind is already telling you if it likes it. Okay. Because of the internet and because we are inundated, with over 40,000 ads a day, 40,000 pieces of information that we don't need. And this has all been through studies. This is not a Dianne DeVitt. I mean, just think of the junk, think of the clutter, think of the internet. So the latest movement right now, and what I've been speaking about for a couple of years, is white space. And when I went to school, when you went to school, those little black and white books that we had, and this is not dating ourselves, this is just a tool for anybody. You always had a column on the side, and that column on the side was to doodle with. Why is that? Because every 20 minutes, our brains shift from thinking right brain or left brain.
I didn't know that.
That's the yoga teacher in me. So that's one of the things. I'm actually a prana yoga teacher, and I practice yoga. And I remember learning that in yoga, because in yoga, when you're practicing your breathing exercises, what you're actually doing is that kinesis of movement between your right and left brain so that it's talking to one another. So getting back to the pencil and the doodle, I think it's a good tool to slow us down, to give us a tactile experience, to let us hear the pencil on the paper, to let us use touch. Because when you use your hand for something, your hand goes right to your brain. And that's why gardeners get a lot of pleasure, and that's why artists get a lot of pleasure. And that actually is MIT. I do a lot of work. I've done some work with MIT, and the slogan on their logo for MIT is hand and mind, so that when you work with your hand, your mind remembers it.
Interesting.
So that's why I say pencil. Bring back pencils, number 2s.
Dianne, one of the things, you walk into a room and you talk about the color and the sensory smell, but what are some of the big faux pas that you've come across that when you walk into the room are like, no, please don't tell me this is real?
Well, my father advised me many years ago that when I go to an event, to remember that I'm not working. But you just can't help it, right? You just can't help it sometimes. So one of the most common thing I see or hear is music. People don't know how to use music the right way. It's either too loud, it's not enough, or it's in the wrong place. I also shake my head very often at how much money people spend on events, and they look fabulous, Barry. And many of my friends are the top designers, right, in the industry, and they make it look great, but it's not user-friendly. I can't see you sitting across the table because the centerpiece is a tree, okay? I can't see you. Or maybe the menu is not comfortable for me to eat if I'm in formal or black tie. Or people choose buffets thinking that it's going to create interaction, but what they don't realize is maybe the objective of the event was more networking and sitting down to get to know one another, and balancing a plate and a drink and standing in line is not allowing that. So maybe I have to redesign that a little bit to be an interactive cocktail reception, a little bit of a sit down, whatever, lunch or dinner, and then maybe another interactive dessert. So I think that even though people think they have all the components, how you put the puzzle pieces together, how you time it, and how you plan it is what's going to make it successful or not. You can have the best performer. I'll give you an example. No names. One of the top realtors in Manhattan. I planned a special event for his family, and people were coming in from all over the country to be with them to celebrate. And they insisted on having a band that they heard when they were away perform. A name band, all right, name band talent. And I said, that's fantastic, and they're fantastic, but this is a family event to celebrate you. Your friends are coming in from all over. Goes back to the question you asked me on how to get a vision ahead. Your families are coming in from all over. They're going to want to speak to you. No, they'll want to hear the music. So they heard the music, and then after the event, they said to me, we should have listened to you because we didn't have enough time to speak to anybody. So, there's no one answer to that question because it depends on the event. But it goes back to the core reason for any event is to bring people together, to give them a chance to speak to one another, right? To gather, to connect. And if you distract, whether it's distracting with food or medicine, or food or music, right? Or any other component, you're taking them off course, and then it's not a success in my mind.
In the closing moments of the show,
Yes.
Dianne, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, I'd like to leave the audience with a thought to never stop learning, never stop smelling something new, tasting something different, touching something that doesn't look that inviting, to constantly keep yourselves learning. It's one of the key messages that I teach in the workshops that I do, is allow yourself to rip up a magazine and do something that part of you is telling you not to do, but this part of you is telling you, just go for it, Barry, and jump in that deep end of the pool.
Dianne, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
It's been very interesting and enlightening.
Thank you.
Learning about events that I didn't know and being creative. Are you creative, or is somebody stomping on your creativity? Love to hear from you. Please write us here at The Woman's Connection. Bye now.